was true. By the day after the wand started glowing, he looked at the destroyed wand. It summoned him. He could not understand the wand's design. He could imagine it in his hands. Just the thought of the wand being torn from George's hand by the legendary General Melody Bellhart. She had that reputation. "Is that the red and wand? Destroy the damn wand shot now!" shouted Elvish Elder. He walked down the corridors, his staff banging along the floor. The silence that echoed as he whistled of the heavy winds could be heard, flowing like a raw energy that was just standing about. He looked at the wand shaft. He grasped it with both hands. He gently tried to break it, then used force on the shaft. It did not break. The anger filled his mind. Why did they want this wand destroyed? It was not cursed or forbidden. It just messed up so many people's heads. As it lived, the idea of destroying something he had found annoyed him. He fumbled around his pockets, trying to focus on his pocket watch. It just kept on ticking by. He could not understand the need for them to destroy the history in itself. The wand was made from bone, animal, to be specific, and he wanted it to be something like a keepsake. But how was he meant to destroy something so special? He acquired the wand that Jablena at the first, and why now do they want it destroyed? He could not understand the need for the wand to be destroyed, but this wand annoyed him. He could see the markings of holes surrounding his shaft, as if it had been attempted before. He gazed upon the wand with an eager mind on his new toy, but his reputation was somewhat following him slowly. It was that time he could not understand why so many people wanted the wand to be gone. But it was a fate it could bring, he did not know. He fumbled around in his pockets. He grasped the black chain with a skull hanging down and pulled out a watch. Again he held it to his ear. He could hear the ticking clock go by, but then realized as the time was getting on, with the sky darkening outside, the silent echoes of the birds or ravens that were talking amongst themselves. Outside the window this time, making the clock seem non-existent, as it disturbed the ticking. That night was darkening. Jablenad was on his mind. How the elvish legends lived. How did he make his name? Why did Merlin take his revenge the way he did? But then again, it was something to do with his fate. No one knew how he died, not even his mother, Melody Fellon. This was a moment when he realized the night was growing in darker. He placed the wand shard back on the table. He then picked up the mahogany box and lifted out the Draco lamp beside her. He looked at it with amazement. His efforts worked. He was happy with his work. But the darkness was filling the room. He walked to his bed, but he stopped at the desk. He knelt to blow out the flickering candle. He looked. He took off his tunic. He then placed the box next to him. Then closed the light lid. Then the silence was relaxing. He placed the watch next to him, to his bed. He could distinctly hear the mechanical movement, ticking on. It had to be wound up if the ticking was to stop. He climbed into his bed, then looked around the room. The whispering started again. "Come to me. Read more about their whack cannibals," it whispered in his ear. This was more about his beliefs that there was something else in this world. But then again, he was often laughed at by the other elders, with his own words reaching no avail. Chapter 4. The reason he cared. He decided the next day to walk around the settlement of the Elvish Elders, but this was met with more than he wanted. He was being looked at by so many admirers for his role he was. He was a man that would destroy the famous cursed wand, but this was not his aim. He wanted to keep the wand. He tossed around the idea of just making the wand look like it had been destroyed. This was more than just a claim. He wanted the power to keep it, but he was not an elder who protected the cursed items of the elders. The way he looked at it was that if the spirit of Bredon was in the shard, why had he not heard of it yet? But that was not the end of his troubles. He could distinctly hear the whispers as he passed the elvish warriors standing there with pride, their golden armour relief etched in with the best of the blacksmiths that once ran the land. The helmets with leaves on them, they were silver with golden etchings on the inside. The swords were golden with silver hilts. Only the wand in his hand, he was pondering on the idea of destroying the item, this time making it his aim to make it happen. But was the time he had a good thing? He could see the elvish elder in the distance, but this time he was confused. But he was determined to destroy the damned keepsake in his hands. He had been thinking about it for some time. The darkness of the piece in his hand annoyed him. He said he had to do it. But then again, why? Sometimes I just look at it, he thought. He had 3 months to do the job. But again, it was worth the wait. He wanted to do it. Then again, it was not easy. He had the age of the wood to lift its curse for sometimes 1 year and a half. But then again, this was not easy task for the elf in question. He had set his mind on it. He was ticking to get it done. But then again, he was always like that. The clock kept him calm. It was a zen moment. It was by this point he had realized the reason was inconsolable. This was his point he always liked to make about his life. But then again, he could always be the same. Same routine, same action, same task to finish the job as he started. But this was not uncommon for him, as this was his happy mode. The way he looked at things was he had a vision that no one could see. He always had the Brephalium in his head. But why would Gibellinad write it? He often pondered on the reason for its creation. It was his quest to find it. Its truth was unheard as this time in the moment of the time he had. But as time went on, he could distinctly hear the reasons behind his own messages, that he was transcending through the mind process of his quest. Then again, he was still walking among the elder trees that were scattered round the forest of Arwa, now an old settlement long forgotten. Oh, how he found so many artifacts that were dug out from the older buildings amongst the tree houses. But he sometimes lost it with elvish eldest, when he would laugh at the silly things that he had found, like masks. But then again, his fascination with the old was always there. How did they live? How did they craft the work? But in most cases, they had just blanked him with his many questions. As time went on, he sometimes enjoyed his time digging into the 5,000-year-old soil. This was the past hobby until now. Was it his last voyage until he was to be appointed the Grand Destroyer, which was an almost funny but annoying thing? Was his ambition not to see or reach bases? This made it hard for him to be understood, but in his head he could not destroy anything he had found. This was a hard task for him, as he wanted nothing to do with the idea of something he found. But he walked further, till he had reached the boundaries of the forest of Arwa. But in this midst he could hear the shouting from afar. "Remember, don't return until the wand is destroyed," Graham shouted from the distance. He turned round and looked at him confused. "Why?" "I was coming back tonight," exclaimed Grant. He walked slowly past the threshold and looked back. "Yes?" he exclaimed in an annoyed voice. He walked past the threshold with an annoyed walk. His stomach was playing with balls as his stomach churned in pure fright. He had been banished in the head until the job was done. Graham shouted again, this time with glee. "Remember Melon's cave in the water?" Graham shouted, then went silent on him. Grant turned round and looked at him with a glint of his teeth, then followed past the statue of Gibellinad. He looked at the wooden carved statue with annoyance. This was his only fear. If he was to destroy the wand, what would they say? But his keepsake was a curse that had to be destroyed. He could see the tribe looking their normal. He had only his clothes on his back and a book in his rucksack with a wand and a shard. He was walking this time, more anxious and annoyed at the thought. What was he meant to do? He looked at the husk of Redden Tower, cursing under his breath his actions and what caused this situation. He could see the rainbow dragoons and its yellow and purple wings, the bright blue and luminous green scales, the long purple and yellow tail flowing through the sky. He gripped the wand in his hand tightly with ambition to fulfill his task, but no one was listening to his cries. He could smell the burnt embers of a traveller. He looked in the Najaf forest, where he could make out a tall man with brown long flowing hair. It was a Westwind rider, his bald and long white and brown hair which looked like a ponytail on his bald and long white. A lame horse getting old ready for the sheep. Or shall I say, a lame horse getting old ready for the shed. Sir, that wand that belonged to my son Jablinnet, the blue-eyed man exclaimed, annoyed at Rand. Rand looked at him. I found it at Redden Tower, he exclaimed in a frightened voice. Sir, do you speak with confidence? The Westman rider exclaimed at him. I do not know you, exclaimed Rand. He looked shyly at him. My son, he carried it up until I hid it in the tower ruins, exclaimed the Westman rider. He looked at him with a different look. You remind me of him, exclaimed the Westman rider, this time smiling. He was a legend in our tribe, exclaimed Rand this time, a bit more confident after analysing him for a while. He looked trustworthy this time, but then he could see the pain in his eyes when he spoke. You mean he lived on? The Westman rider exclaimed again. I found it. It was glowing, exclaimed Rand. The Westman rider went silent and looked at him. Behind him was his horse. He looked at the horse and mounted him. He placed his feet in the leather stirrups, then kicked his heels and rode on. Take that blasted fucking wand of Redden out of here. The Westman rider paused. He looked at him. Don't lose that wand. Keep it safe as long as you live, he spoke, then kicked his foot on the horse. Then it rode on. The shadow was all that he could see, as the tall 6-foot man rode on in his white hair and brown flowing through the winds. He turned round in silence and rode on into the distance of the night. He could hear the scream. Why, Jablinnet, have you cursed me? Rand screamed in annoyance. The Westwind rider turned round with his horse and shouted. It was powerful with the words, he shouted as he turned the horse round and rode on into the night. Rand looked at the rider and sighed, but held his head high, the wand shard speaking to him again. Take me to the shrine of the first Redden Utopia, whispered the wand shard. He ignored us again and rode on again. This was his last chance to impress the Elvish Elder and become the Elder himself. But he could hear the silence the sun was setting at the hole above the sky. It was covered in moss and overgrown trees. It was by this moment he could see the dragoon's flames red and yellow bellowing from its mouth. It was by this point he looked ahead, his eyes growing tired, his legs feeling like lead. He found a hideout, then crawled into it. He closed his eyes as he laid on the ground. The next morning, the sounds of wolves running wild could be heard. The moment he looked up and he could see a tall statue in front of him. It was a statue of Melody Fellard, whom was left to ruin. Her shrine now rust. It was made from tin. It rusted over time, but she could still be recognizable by the Death Witch, now a blasted mess of misshaped colour and drained of its shine. But as this time progressed, the image of the wand now a bent out of shaped mess. He jumped up, then decided to walk on towards the Tower of Red. But he stopped. What else could be found? The mythical wand of Redden's legacy, the green wand that was once considered dead or the destruction by the travellers whom were against the family. He sometimes wondered if the wand was still around. But he had a task in his head that was to destroy the red wand. But his mind was on something else, something more important. Why his mother was so excited about the news of a discovery on something that was considered that benign that no one could understand it. The fact that the wand was nothing but a tool that was used in wicked magic. But then again, she was the type of woman who was fascinated by the idea of things holding importance to her. She was that type of woman. But she had met Jablenad before he was born. She looked at Jablenad as a god, and the rest of the tribe did as well. But it was the way things panned out over time. For some, it was the idea that not everything was God. There was the select few that often referenced the upbringing of the last of the warlord Gallo, who wielded a fierce law that he was the god. At that point, they loved the elvish fighters, but then again, it was his will that single-handedly brought down the last of the Fellards and the loving follower Hubert, who was taken by him. He rotted in the dungeons of the tower before the burning from the remainder of the land. He looked ahead and noticed the nesting dragoons that were lasting their breaths on the eggs they had laid, waiting for the dragoons to hatch from them. But this was not his aim. They were beautiful, with smooth scales and greens and blacks. They were in the birthing season. But this was not the end of birthing season. They had yet to hatch. He had always been eager to watch this happen, but was disturbed by a polecat scratching its tunic. He knelt down and stroked the smooth fur of the animal, then looked at him with a smile. "Hello, furry. What are you doing here?" he exclaimed lovingly. But the polecat scuttled away from the dragoon. He brushed this off quickly. The weather was dramatically changing. The winds were picking up, but the sky was light. He could hear the thunder roll and the flashes of bright yellow sparks in the sky. The dragoons lifted his head, then looked above, and he could hear the mighty roar of the dragoon. Then flames that followed as it bowed its head, then continued heating the egg. Ran looked at the skyline, slowly changing from dark to grey. It was a truly depressing day for the lad. But again, he could never understand. He walked towards the rock in front of him. "You destroy the damn one-shot!" shouted the Westland rider from a distance. All he could pick up was the hoofs of a horse galloping along. The message was the same. But why did they want to destroy? He kept saying to himself. But then again, it was the way it was unfolding. He looked at the distance ahead of him, his eyes constantly looking at the castle in front of him, ruined like an old building that people just ignore. It was the last of the messages that were missing from the beginning. It was the Cloud-9 that started the war, the white marbled walls now a mess of dirt and moss, the crystal clock no longer ticking, the gardens now overgrown, the crystal cave dripping with green clear water. Oh, how he wondered what happened to the grand buildings over time, the spiral towers that once had notability and bountiful comps every year, the rooms exposed by the moss-covered stone. This was something that was not yet explained, as no one knew the building lay to ruin over time. But as time went on, the vision came to his head. It was a glorious moment when Melinda won the cup. But the broom rider was alien, with mechanical beasts flying down from the sky. It was then he realized this was the woman that was called wicked and evil even to this day. The castle was grand, a full maze with a golden gate leading to the river of Utopia. But this soon ended, when he was astounded by a gate that read, "Beware the dragon."